think about the universe late at night, when the world around me quiets down and my mind can wander freely through the vast corridors of cosmic time, there's something profoundly humbling about contemplating the origins of everything, not just as a scientific puzzle to be solved, but as a deeply personal question that touches the very essence of what it means to exist. When I consider the beginning, or perhaps the many beginnings, I find myself drawn not to equations or measurements, but to the strange poetry of existence itself, the way time might fold back on itself like a ribbon, the way reality might bubble and foam like an endless ocean. These aren't just abstract concepts to me. They feel like whispers from the universe, inviting us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about beginnings and endings. The classical picture of the beginning has always struck me as both elegant and troubling. We're told about a singularity, a point where all the rules break down, where density becomes infinite and time itself emerges from nothing. But the more I sit with this idea, the more it feels incomplete, like trying to read a book with the first page torn out. What does it mean for something to begin? I remember as a child asking my grandfather where the first tree came from, and he would say from a seed, but then I'd ask about the first seed, and we'd end up in this wonderful, infinite regress that made us both laugh. The singularity feels like that to me, a boundary where our language and concepts fail us, where we're forced to confront the limits of what we can know. But here's where my thoughts take an interesting turn. What if the singularity isn't really the beginning at all? What if it's more like a doorway, a transition point between something that came before and everything that came after? I find myself drawn to this idea of the cosmic bounce, this notion that the universe might contract and expand like a cosmic spring, eternally cycling through phases of compression and expansion. When I think about this, I imagine time itself as a vast fabric, not stretched in a single direction, but woven in loops and spirals, each universe a thread in an incomprehensibly complex tapestry. The bounce suggests that what we call the Big Bang might have been more like a big rebound, a moment when the universe reached maximum compression and then sprang back outward with tremendous force. This changes everything about how I understand existence. If the universe bounces, then there's no true beginning, no moment when time itself was created. Instead, there's an eternal rhythm, a cosmic heartbeat that has been pulsing forever. I think about this when I watch the ocean waves, how each wave seems individual with its own birth and death, but really it's all part of one continuous body of water, one eternal motion. Could our universe be like that? Could what we experience as our singular, unique cosmos actually be just one wave in an infinite ocean of cosmic cycles? The thought is dizzying, exhilarating, and deeply philosophical. It reminds me of Nietzsche's eternal return, but on a cosmic scale, not just the events of our lives repeating, but the entire structure of space and time itself, endlessly cycling through the same fundamental patterns. When I contemplate these cycles, I can't help but wonder about memory and information. If the universe bounces, what survives from one cycle to the next? Does anything carry over, or is each bounce a complete reset, a cosmic amnesia that wipes the slate clean? This question haunts me because it speaks to something deeper about meaning and continuity. If everything that exists now, every star, every planet, every thought I've ever had, is destined to compress back into that singular point and then bounce out again, possibly in a completely different configuration, what does that mean for the significance of our actions, our loves, our creations? I find myself caught between two responses. One that says nothing matters if it's all temporary and cyclical, and another that says everything matters precisely because it's part of this grand eternal dance. The idea of the bounce also makes me think differently about the arrow of time, that curious one-way street we all seem to be traveling down. We experience time as flowing from past to future, from order to disorder, from youth to age. This directionality feels so fundamental to our existence that it's hard to imagine any other way of being. But if the universe bounces, then perhaps the arrow of time isn't truly fundamental at all. Perhaps it's more like a local phenomenon, something that emerges during the expansion phase but might reverse or dissolve during contraction. I picture time as a river that seems to flow in one direction when you're in it, but from above you can see it winds and curves, sometimes even forming eddies where the water seems to flow backward. Could time be like that on cosmic scales? This brings me to wonder about entropy, that relentless increase in disorder that seems to govern everything from melting ice cubes to aging stars. We're told that entropy always increases, that the universe is running down like a cosmic clock, heading towards some ultimate heat death, where all energy is evenly distributed and nothing interesting can ever happen again. But what if the bounce resets entropy? What if, at the moment of maximum compression, the cosmic clock somehow winds itself back up, ready for another cycle of increasing complexity and eventual dissolution? The thought fills me with a strange mixture of hope and vertigo. Hope because it suggests that the universe might not be doomed to a cold, dark ending. Vertigo because it implies an eternity of cycles with no ultimate purpose or destination. I often find myself thinking about what happens at the bounce point itself. Classical physics tells us that at the singularity, densities become infinite and our equations break down. It's like hitting a wall in our understanding. But perhaps that wall is just a limitation of our current perspective, like trying to describe the ocean using only the language of individual water molecules. When I consider the bounce, I imagine it not as a mathematical singularity, but as a kind of cosmic phase transition, like water turning to steam or ice turning to water. These transitions, the rules change, but continuity remains. Could the universe undergo something similar at the bounce point? Could the very fabric of space and time transform into something fundamentally different during compression, only to transform back during expansion? This makes me think about the nature of space itself. We tend to imagine space as a fixed stage on which events unfold, a cosmic theater that existed before the actors arrived and will remain after they've left. But what if space is more dynamic than that? What if space itself is created and destroyed in each cycle, woven and unwoven like Penelope's tapestry? I picture space as something alive, breathing, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the cosmic bounce. During expansion, space creates room for structure, galaxies, stars, planets, life, consciousness. During contraction, all of that structure collapses back down, but perhaps the potential for it remains, encoded somehow in the geometry of space itself, ready to blossom again in the next cycle. The cyclical universe also raises profound questions about causation and origins. If the universe bounces eternally, then there's no first cause, no prime mover, no ultimate answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing? Instead, there just is, eternally, necessarily, without beginning or end. This seems to answer the question by dissolving it, by showing that the question itself might be based on false assumptions about how reality works. It's like asking, what's north of the North Pole? The question seems meaningful until you understand the geometry of the sphere, and then you realize it's asking for something that doesn't exist. Perhaps what caused the universe is similar, a question that seems profound but actually reflects our misunderstanding of cosmic structure. Yet even as I embrace this cyclical vision, I feel a subtle resistance in my chest. Something in me wants there to be a beginning, a moment when it all started, a point of origin that gives structure and meaning to the narrative of existence. This desire, I think, comes from the way we experience our own lives. We each have a beginning, a birth, and we naturally project that pattern onto the universe itself. But perhaps this is just human parochialism, an inability to imagine existence on truly cosmic scales. Perhaps the universe doesn't need a beginning any more than a circle needs a starting point. The circle simply is eternally complete, and maybe the cosmos works the same way, bouncing eternally through cycles of expansion and contraction without any need for an ultimate origin. When I think about the bounce from a philosophical perspective, I'm reminded of the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who said, "You can never step in the same river twice." Each cosmic cycle might be unique, even if the fundamental process is the same. The river of existence flows endlessly, but the water, the specific configuration of matter, energy, and structure, is never quite identical from one moment to the next, or from one cycle to the next. This gives me a strange comfort, the idea that even in eternal recurrence, there's still novelty, still uniqueness, still genuine newness emerging from the cosmic spring. But then I wonder, how would we ever know if the universe bounces? What evidence could possibly survive from a previous cycle? If the bounce crushes everything down to a point where all information is destroyed or scrambled, then each cycle is effectively isolated from all others, sealed off by the impenetrable barrier of the bounce point. We might be living in the millionth cycle or the first, and there would be no way to tell. This epistemic isolation troubles me because it makes the whole idea seem almost metaphysical rather than physical, a grand philosophical speculation that might be true but can never be verified. Yet even if we can never prove it, the idea itself has power. It changes how I think about existence, purpose, and my place in the cosmic order. The bounce also makes me reconsider the nature of creation itself. In the traditional singularity picture, creation is explosive, violent, a sudden emergence of everything from nothing. But the bounce suggests something different, not creation but transformation, not emergence but continuation. The universe doesn't begin, it changes form, like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. Both are expressions of the same underlying entity, but the form is so different that we might mistake the transformation for creation. This metaphor appeals to me deeply because it suggests that what we call creation might really be metamorphosis, that the universe is constantly reinventing itself, dying and being reborn in an endless cycle of cosmic renewal. I sit here now, aware of my own smallness against this vast backdrop of eternal cycling, and I feel something shift inside me. If the universe truly bounces, then I am part of something far more vast and ancient than I ever imagined. The atoms in my body might have been forged and reformed countless times through previous cycles. The energy that animates my thoughts might be as old as existence itself, merely recycled and reconfigured through each bounce. This realization doesn't diminish me. Instead, it connects me to a lineage that stretches back infinitely, makes me part of a cosmic dance that has no beginning and no end. In this vision, I am not separate from the universe, but woven into its very fabric, a temporary pattern in an eternal tapestry of becoming. But there are other ways to imagine what might have come before, or perhaps I should say what might exist alongside our cosmic story. I find myself thinking about membranes, not the biological kind, but vast cosmic surfaces floating in dimensions we cannot see. This idea emerges from string theory, that elegant mathematical framework that tries to describe everything in the universe as tiny vibrating strings. But the theory doesn't stop with strings. It expands to include branes, short for membranes, which are surfaces of various dimensions existing in a higher dimensional space called the bulk. When I first encountered this concept, I'll admit I struggled with it. How can our entire universe be a membrane? How can there be dimensions beyond the three of space and one of time that we experience? I've come to think of it this way. Imagine being a character drawn on a piece of paper, living in a two-dimensional world. You can move left, right, and forward, backward, but you have no concept of up, down. The paper itself floats in a three-dimensional room, but you can never perceive that third dimension. It's simply beyond your experience. Now extend that analogy. Our universe might be like that piece of paper, a three-dimensional brain floating in a higher dimensional bulk that we cannot directly perceive. Everything we experience, every star, every galaxy, every particle exists on our brain, bound to its surface like ink on paper. But there might be other brains floating nearby in that higher dimensional space, other universes with their own physics, their own histories, their own forms of existence. The truly mind-expanding part comes when we consider what happens if these brains collide. According to some versions of this theory, our Big Bang might not have been the beginning of everything, but rather the result of a collision between two brains drifting through the bulk. Picture two vast membranes, each carrying its own universe, slowly moving through a higher dimensional space. They approach each other, building up energy, and then impact. The collision releases enormous energy, heating our brain and creating all the matter and radiation we see around us. The collision itself becomes what we interpret as the Big Bang, not a beginning from nothing, but a violent interaction between pre-existing structures. This vision transforms my understanding of cosmic origins in profound ways. If the Big Bang was a collision, then time and space didn't begin with our universe. They existed before, in those brains drifting through the bulk. Our universe has a birthday, but reality itself might be far older, or perhaps timeless, in the bulk where different rules apply. I think about this late at night, trying to wrap my mind around the idea that our entire cosmic story, from the first light to the formation of galaxies to the emergence of life, might be just one chapter in a much vaster narrative playing out across dimensions we cannot see. It's humbling and exhilarating in equal measure. The brain collision scenario also suggests cycles, but different from the bounce I was contemplating earlier. In some versions of this theory, after the collision, the brains bounce apart, moving away from each other through the bulk. This separation stretches the space between them, which from our perspective looks like the expansion of the universe. But what happens next? Could the brains eventually stop separating and start moving back together? Could they collide again, creating another Big Bang, another universe with new laws and new possibilities? The thought suggests a kind of cosmic breathing, an expansion and contraction, not of our universe itself, but of the distance between brains and the bulk. This makes me wonder about the other brain, the one that collided with ours. What is it like now? Does it have its own galaxies, its own planets, its own life forms, contemplating the nature of existence, or did the collision destroy it, merging it completely with our brain so that it no longer exists as a separate entity? The physics here becomes speculative, almost mythological, but I find value in the speculation itself. It reminds me that our universe might not be alone, that existence might be far more diverse and complex than we ever imagined. Somewhere in the bulk, perhaps just millimeters away in a dimension we cannot access, there might be entire universes with physics so different from ours that we couldn't recognize them as universes at all. The idea of branes also connects to something called eternal inflation, another framework for thinking about cosmic origins and structure. Inflation is that brief period in the early universe when space expanded exponentially fast, smoothing out irregularities and setting the stage for structure formation. But what if inflation, once started, never truly stops? What if, in most regions of space, inflation continues forever, creating an eternally expanding foam of space-time? This is the core insight of eternal inflation, that quantum fluctuations in the field driving inflation create regions where inflation ends and regions where it continues, and the regions where it continues expand so rapidly that they dominate the total volume of existence. In this picture, our observable universe is just one bubble in an infinite foam, one small region where inflation happened to end, allowing matter and radiation to form. But beyond our bubble, inflation continues, spawning new bubbles constantly, each with its own physics, its own constants of nature, its own history. These bubbles are like separate universes, causally disconnected from each other because the inflating space between them expands faster than light can travel. I find this vision both beautiful and unsettling. Beautiful because it suggests an inexhaustible creativity in the cosmos, an endless generation of new possibilities. Unsettling because it means we can never know what lies beyond our bubble. The inflating space forms an impassable barrier, hiding the rest of existence from us forever. When I think about eternal inflation, I can't help but consider the philosophical implications. If there are infinitely many bubble universes, each with different physics, then everything that can happen will happen somewhere. There will be universes almost identical to ours, but with tiny differences. A universe where I chose a different career, a universe where dinosaurs never went extinct, a universe where humans never evolved. This is the ultimate expression of the multiverse concept, a reality so vast and diverse that it contains every possible variation of existence. Does this make our universe less special, less meaningful? Or does it make existence richer, more wondrous, by showing that we're part of something far grander than we imagined? I grapple with this question often. Part of me feels diminished by the multiverse. If everything happens somewhere, then nothing is truly unique or special. Our achievements, our struggles, our loves, they're all just one instance among infinite variations. But another part of me finds deep meaning in this vastness. We exist among all the possible universes, in all the infinite foam of eternal inflation. This particular configuration happened, and it produced consciousness capable of contemplating its own existence. That seems miraculous to me, regardless of how many other miracles might exist elsewhere. The fact that I can sit here thinking these thoughts, feeling this wonder that remains profound, even if it's replicated infinitely across the multiverse. The eternal inflation scenario also raises questions about probability and prediction. If anything that can happen will happen somewhere in the multiverse, then how do we make meaningful predictions? How do we explain why our universe has the particular properties it does rather than different ones? This is where the anthropic principle enters my thinking. The idea that we observe the universe we do because if it were significantly different, we wouldn't be here to observe anything at all. Our universe has the right properties for life, because if it didn't, we wouldn't exist to wonder about it. This feels simultaneously profound and unsatisfying to me. Profound because it connects our existence to cosmic structure in a deep way. Unsatisfying because it seems to explain things by reference to our presence, which feels circular somehow. Yet the anthropic principle might be the best we can do in a multiverse scenario. If there are countless bubbles with different physics, then of course we find ourselves in one that allows for life. We couldn't find ourselves anywhere else. It's like asking why we live on a planet with breathable air. Not because Earth is special in any cosmic sense, but because we need breathable air to survive. So naturally we're on a planet that provides it. Extended to the cosmic scale, this suggests that the fundamental constants of nature that seem so finely tuned for life might not be designed or special. They're just one possibility among many, and we happen to exist in a bubble where they have life-permitting values. But this reasoning troubles me when I follow it too far. If we explain everything by anthropic selection, don't we give up on finding deeper explanations? Isn't there a risk of intellectual laziness, of saying it's like this because otherwise we wouldn't be here, rather than seeking genuine understanding? I think the key is to use anthropic reasoning carefully, as a constraint on theories rather than a theory itself. In a multiverse with varying physics, we should find ourselves in a universe that not only allows for our existence, but is also reasonably typical among life-permitting universes. This gives us something to test, some predictions we can make about what we should observe if the multiverse picture is correct. The foam of eternal inflation also makes me think about infinity in new ways. Mathematicians distinguish between different sizes of infinity, and I wonder if something similar applies to the multiverse. There might be infinitely many bubbles, but are there different degrees of infinity involved? Are some regions of the multiverse more infinite than others? These questions quickly exceed my understanding, but they point to something important. When we talk about infinity in physics, we're venturing into deep philosophical and mathematical territory. Infinity isn't just a very large number. It's a fundamentally different concept that challenges our intuitions about quantity, probability, and existence itself. I find myself returning to the image of foam, that bubbling, frothing sea of space-time constantly giving birth to new universes. It's such a dynamic picture, so different from the static cosmos of earlier centuries. The universe isn't a clockwork mechanism winding down. It's a creative process constantly generating novelty, endlessly exploring possibilities. Each bubble is an experiment in physics, a trial run of different combinations of forces and particles and constants. Most bubbles might be sterile, incapable of supporting complexity or life. But occasionally, by pure chance, a bubble forms with just the right properties, and consciousness emerges and begins to wonder about its origins. This brings me back to branes and their relation to eternal inflation. Could these two frameworks be describing different aspects of the same reality? Perhaps the branes exist in the bulk, and eternal inflation happens on each brane, creating bubble universes on the brane's surface. Or perhaps collisions between branes trigger episodes of inflation, creating new bubble-filled regions of space-time. The physics here becomes highly speculative, and I'm acutely aware that I'm playing with ideas that physicists themselves haven't fully worked out. But there's value in this play, I think. It helps me appreciate the sheer creativity of existence, the way reality seems to find every possible way to express itself. Reflecting deeper on these cosmic scenarios, I find myself drawn to something even more fundamental, the nature of empty space itself, or what we call the vacuum. For most of human history, we thought of empty space as truly empty, a void containing nothing. But quantum mechanics revealed something astonishing. The vacuum is not empty at all. It seethes with activity, bubbling with what we call quantum fluctuations, tiny temporary disturbances in the energy fields that permeate all of space. These aren't just mathematical abstractions, they have real, measurable effects on particles and light, subtle influences that physicists have detected in laboratories. When I imagine the vacuum now, I picture it as a boiling sea, its surface constantly rippling with waves that appear and disappear in fractions of a second. These fluctuations arise from the fundamental uncertainty built into quantum mechanics, the principle that tells us we can never know both the position and momentum of a particle with perfect precision, or both the energy and duration of an event. In the vacuum, this uncertainty means that energy can briefly appear from nowhere, creating pairs of virtual particles that spring into existence and then annihilate each other almost immediately. The vacuum is alive with this constant creation and destruction, this quantum dance that never stops. But here's where it becomes truly mind-blowing for me. These quantum fluctuations in the vacuum might be responsible for everything we see around us. During the early universe, during that brief period of inflation, when space expanded exponentially fast, tiny quantum fluctuations in the vacuum were stretched to enormous scales. What started as microscopic ripples in the fabric of spacetime became cosmic scale variations in density, and these variations eventually collapsed under gravity to form galaxies, stars, planets, and ultimately us. When I look at the night sky and see the clustered pattern of galaxies, I'm seeing the amplified echo of quantum fluctuations that occurred in the first tiny fraction of a second after the Big Bang. This realization fills me with a kind of existential vertigo. Everything, every structure in the universe, every star that has ever shone, every planet that has ever formed, every thought that has ever been thought, traces back to random quantum fluctuations in empty space. There's no design here, no plan, just the inevitable amplification of quantum randomness by the exponential expansion of space. And yet, paradoxically, this randomness produced the order we see, the structure we inhabit, the complexity that gave rise to consciousness. How does randomness produce order? How does quantum noise become cosmic architecture? I think the answer lies in gravity and the arrow of time. The quantum fluctuations themselves were random, yes, but once they were imprinted on the fabric of space as slight variations in density, gravity took over. Regions that were slightly denser had slightly stronger gravity, which pulled in more matter, which increased the gravity further in a runaway process that eventually produced stars and galaxies. The fluctuations were the seed, but gravity was the gardener, cultivating those seeds into the cosmic garden we inhabit. And all of this unfolded in the direction of increasing entropy, of greater disorder at the cosmic scale, even as local pockets of order emerged. The relationship between quantum fluctuations and cosmic structure also makes me reconsider the boundary between the quantum and classical worlds. We usually think of quantum mechanics as governing the microscopic realm, atoms, electrons, photons, while classical physics governs the large-scale world of planets and stars. But during inflation, quantum fluctuations became classical structures. The boundary dissolved, or rather, it moved. What started quantum became classical through the process of expansion and gravitational amplification. This suggests that the distinction between quantum and classical isn't fundamental but contextual, dependent on scale and circumstance. When I contemplate the vacuum and its fluctuations, I also think about the simulation hypothesis, that curious idea that our entire universe might be a simulation running in some higher computational substrate. At first glance, this seems like science fiction, or perhaps philosophy, masquerading as physics. But there are serious thinkers who take it seriously. And I find myself intrigued by the question even if I'm uncertain about the answer. If the universe is a simulation, what would that mean for the quantum fluctuations in the vacuum? Would they be genuine randomness or pseudo-randomness generated by an algorithm? Would the simulator need to compute every fluctuation, or could they use statistical shortcuts? The simulation hypothesis connects to the multiverse in interesting ways. If it's possible to simulate a universe, and if advanced civilizations eventually develop that capability, then there might be far more simulated universes than real ones. In that case, by pure probability, we're more likely to be in a simulation than in base reality. This argument has a strange, vertiginous quality that appeals to me even as I recognize its speculative nature. It's like a cosmic version of Plato's cave allegory. We might be seeing only shadows of a deeper reality, projections on the wall of a cave we don't even know we're in. But what would it mean to live in a simulation? Would our experiences be less real, less meaningful? I don't think so. If consciousness is a pattern of information processing, then it shouldn't matter whether that processing happens in biological neurons or simulated ones. The experience itself would be equally real from the inside. My thoughts, my feelings, my sense of wonder at the cosmos, these would be genuine regardless of the substrate they run on. The simulation hypothesis, if true, would change what the universe is made of, but not necessarily what it means to be alive and conscious within it. Still, I find myself resistant to the simulation idea on some level. It feels like it pushes the fundamental questions back one level without truly answering them. If our universe is a simulation, what about the universe of the simulators? Is that simulated too? Do we end up in an infinite regress of simulations within simulations? Or is there a base reality somewhere? And if there is a base reality, why should we think we're not in it? These questions swirl in my mind without resolution, and perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps some questions are meant to provoke rather than to be definitively answered. What draws me more is the connection between the simulation hypothesis and the anthropic principle. If multiple simulations are run with different physics, then we naturally find ourselves in one with physics that allows for our existence, just as with the multiverse scenarios I considered earlier. The simulation hypothesis provides another framework for generating the diversity of possible universes that makes anthropic reasoning applicable. Whether that diversity comes from eternal inflation, brane collisions, quantum fluctuations, spawning different vacuum states, or computational simulations, the philosophical outcome is similar. We exist in a universe fine-tuned for life because we couldn't exist otherwise. This makes me think about the role of consciousness in the cosmos in all these scenarios: bouncing universes, colliding branes, eternal inflation, simulations. Consciousness seems almost accidental, a byproduct of physical processes that would occur whether or not awareness emerged. The universe doesn't seem to need consciousness. It would expand and evolve and spawn structure regardless of whether anyone was there to observe it. And yet, here we are, conscious beings contemplating our own origins. Does our presence change anything? Does observation play any role in determining cosmic outcomes? Quantum mechanics suggests that observation might matter in subtle ways. Before measurement, quantum systems exist in superpositions of multiple states. Measurement collapses the superposition into a definite outcome. But what counts as measurement? Does it require consciousness, or is any physical interaction sufficient? The debate continues among physicists and philosophers, but I lean toward thinking that consciousness isn't special in this context. Physical interaction is enough to collapse superpositions. Still, the fact that we can observe, that we can measure, that we can know, that seems meaningful, even if it's not physically privileged. Perhaps the significance of consciousness lies not in what it does to the universe, but in what it represents. The universe becoming aware of itself, matter organizing into configurations capable of contemplation and wonder. In all the vast foam of eternal inflation, in all the bouncing cycles and colliding branes, how often does consciousness emerge? How rare is this spark of awareness that allows the cosmos to know itself? I suspect it's rarer than we'd like to think, that vast stretches of existence unfold without any witness, without any understanding. That makes our existence precious, I think, not because we're central or special in any cosmic plan, but because we're capable of appreciation, of awe, of love. When I think about quantum fluctuations in the vacuum giving rise to all structure, when I imagine branes colliding in higher dimensions, when I contemplate eternal inflation spawning infinite bubble universes, I'm struck by how contingent everything seems. Our existence depends on countless specific conditions being just right: the strength of gravity, the mass of the electron, the rate of cosmic expansion, the particular configuration of quantum fluctuations in our patch of space. Change any of these even slightly, and we wouldn't be here. This contingency could be depressing, suggesting that we're accidental and meaningless. But I choose to see it differently, as a reminder of how extraordinary it is that we exist at all. The vacuum's fluctuations also make me reconsider the concept of nothingness. Philosophers have long debated why there is something rather than nothing, treating nothing as the natural default state. But quantum mechanics suggests that true nothingness might be impossible, that the vacuum with its quantum fluctuations is the closest thing to nothing that can actually exist. In that case, the question transforms. Not why is there something rather than nothing, but why does this particular something exist rather than some other configuration? The question becomes more tractable, more answerable in terms of physics and probability and the structure of possibility space. Yet even as I embrace these physical frameworks for understanding cosmic origins and structure, I find myself pulled toward deeper questions about meaning and purpose. If we exist in a multiverse, whether generated by eternal inflation, brane collisions, or quantum branching, what does that imply for ethics and responsibility? This is where cosmology touches something profoundly human, where the abstract physics connects to how we live our lives. In a multiverse, where every possibility is realized somewhere. Do our choices matter? If there are versions of me making every possible decision, does it matter which decision this version makes? I wrestle with this question often, and I've come to think that the multiverse, far from diminishing moral responsibility, might actually heighten it. Yes, there might be other versions of me making different choices in parallel universes, but this version, the one sitting here, now contemplating these questions, still has to make choices, still experiences consequences, still lives a particular life with particular relationships and particular impacts on others. The existence of other versions doesn't erase the reality of this version. If anything, it emphasizes that each universe, each branch, each bubble is real and significant in its own right. The multiverse doesn't dilute meaning, it multiplies it. This connects to something philosophers call modal realism, the idea that all possible worlds are equally real. David Lewis famously argued for this position, suggesting that when we talk about what's possible, we're really talking about what's actual in some other world. From this perspective, the multiverse isn't just a physical hypothesis, but a metaphysical necessity. Possibility and actuality are two sides of the same coin, different perspectives on the same underlying reality. I find this view simultaneously exhilarating and unsettling. Exhilarating because it suggests that imagination and reality are closer than we think, that when we conceive of alternative possibilities, we might be glimpsing actual worlds. Unsettling because it raises questions about personal identity and uniqueness that I'm not sure how to answer. The anthropic principle takes on new dimensions when I consider it in this broader philosophical context. We've established that we must find ourselves in a universe compatible with our existence. We couldn't observe anything else. But this fact, rather than being a mere tautology, points to something deeper about the relationship between consciousness and cosmos. The universe, or at least our bubble of it, had to have very specific properties to produce observers like us. The fundamental constants had to fall within narrow ranges. The initial conditions had to be just right. The fluctuations had to have the right amplitude. Change any of these significantly, and we wouldn't be here. Some people find this fine-tuning evidence for design, for a cosmic intelligence that set the parameters deliberately. I understand the appeal of this view, but I lean toward the multiverse explanation instead. Not because I have anything against the idea of cosmic purpose, but because the multiverse explanation seems more parsimonious to me. It explains fine-tuning through probability rather than intention. If there are countless universes with different parameters, then of course some will have the right combination for life, and of course we find ourselves in one of those. The alternative that our universe is the only one and just happens to have exactly the right properties seems less probable to me, though I acknowledge this is partly a matter of philosophical temperament. But the anthropic principle also carries a warning, a reminder of our cosmic responsibility. We exist in a universe that permits consciousness, perhaps one of the rare bubbles in the eternal inflation where awareness can emerge. That makes us, in some sense, the universe's way of knowing itself. When I look at the stars, it's not just me looking, it's matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own origins. When I feel wonder at the cosmic story, that wonder is itself part of the story, a chapter in which the universe develops self-awareness. This perspective suggests that consciousness isn't incidental, but represents something cosmically significant, even if not cosmically central. The responsibility that comes with this realization weighs on me. If consciousness is rare, if awareness is precious, then we have an obligation to preserve it, nurture it, extend it. The extinction of consciousness on Earth would be more than a local tragedy. It would be a cosmic loss, a universe falling silent to itself in at least this corner of existence. This gives me a framework for thinking about existential risks, about the long-term future of humanity, and any other conscious beings that might exist. We're not just responsible for ourselves and our immediate communities, but for the continuation of cosmic self-awareness itself. These ethical reflections lead me to consider the relationship between cosmology and meaning. Some argue that if the universe is meaningless, if it arose through blind physical processes without purpose or plan, then our lives are meaningless too. But I reject this logic completely. The universe doesn't need to have built-in meaning for our lives to be meaningful. We create meaning through our relationships, our projects, our experiences, our growth. The cosmos provides the stage, but we write the stories. The fact that the stage arose through quantum fluctuations and cosmic inflation doesn't diminish the stories. If anything, it makes them more remarkable, showing that meaning can emerge from meaninglessness, that purpose can arise from purposeless processes. I think about this when I consider the cyclic models, whether it's the bouncing universe or the colliding branes. If the universe goes through endless cycles, if everything we build will eventually be crushed back down and potentially recreated in a different form, does that make our creations pointless? I don't think so. Each moment has value in itself, regardless of whether it persists eternally. The love I feel for the people in my life doesn't become less real because we're all temporary. The beauty of a sunset doesn't diminish because the sun will eventually burn out. The meaning exists in the experiencing, not in the permanence. This brings me to contemplate time itself from a more philosophical angle. We experience time as flowing, as carrying us from past to future. But is this flow fundamental, or is it an illusion created by our consciousness? Some physicists and philosophers argue that time might be more like space. All moments exist equally, and our sensation of moving through time is like moving through space. From this perspective, often called the block universe view, the past and future are just as real as the present. They're just located at different positions in time. This view fits naturally with relativity, which treats time as a dimension similar to the spatial dimensions. If the block universe view is correct, then everything that ever happened or will happen exists eternally in the four-dimensional structure of space-time. My birth, my death, every moment in between. All of it exists timelessly, not in the sense of lasting forever, but in the sense of being outside the flow of time entirely. This view can feel comforting or disturbing depending on how I approach it. Comforting because it suggests that nothing is ever truly lost. Every moment of joy, every connection, every experience exists permanently in the structure of reality. Disturbing because it seems to eliminate free will. If the future already exists, how can our choices be genuine? I find myself in an interesting tension here. The physics seems to point toward the block universe, toward a timeless existence where past, present, and future are equally real. But my lived experience insists on genuine flow, on an open future that hasn't been determined yet, on choices that really matter. Perhaps both perspectives capture something true. The physics describes reality from outside, from a perspective that sees the whole structure at once, while my consciousness navigates through that structure, experiencing it as flowing and open. The map and the territory are different, but both valid. This connects back to the multiverse in interesting ways. In the quantum multiverse, where every possibility branches into reality, the block universe picture becomes even more complex. Instead of a single four-dimensional block, we have a vast branching structure where every quantum event splits the timeline. My choices don't determine a single future. They determine which branch I follow through the quantum thicket. All branches exist, all futures are real, but my experience follows one particular path through the possibilities. Does this preserve free will or eliminate it? I honestly don't know, but I find the question endlessly fascinating. The cyclical models add another layer to this temporal philosophy. If the universe bounces or branes collide repeatedly, does time itself cycle? Is there a meta-time that governs the cycles, or is each cycle its own temporal domain? Could time be circular rather than linear, returning eventually to its starting point? These questions push at the boundaries of what I can meaningfully conceive. Circular time suggests that everything will happen again, that we're trapped in eternal recurrence. But if each cycle is truly identical, then there's no sense in which it's happening again. It's more like the same moment existing eternally, experienced over and over, or perhaps experienced only once, despite the cycling. Nietzsche contemplated eternal recurrence and found it both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means every mistake, every suffering, every regret will happen infinitely many times. Liberating because it emphasizes the importance of each moment. If you knew you'd live this exact life infinitely many times, would you change anything? The thought experiment pushes us to embrace life fully, to affirm every moment, including the difficult ones. I see parallels between Nietzsche's philosophical recurrence and the physical cycling of bouncing cosmologies, though I'm careful not to conflate them too directly. Still, both invite a particular attitude toward existence: amor fati, love of fate, acceptance, and affirmation of reality as it is. As I reach the final stretch of these reflections, I find myself returning to the question that animates all cosmological inquiry. What does it mean for us, for humanity, for conscious beings, to exist in this cosmos? All the physics, all the mathematics, all the speculation about bouncing universes and colliding branes and eternal inflation. It ultimately matters because we are here, wondering, questioning, seeking to understand. The universe has produced beings capable of contemplating their own cosmic context, and that fact seems to me more remarkable than any physical mechanism we might discover. I think about our place in the cosmic story differently now than I did before contemplating these ideas. If we live in just one bubble among infinitely many in eternal inflation, or on one brane among many floating in the bulk, or in one cycle of an eternally bouncing universe, does that make us insignificant? The question haunts me, but I've come to reject the premise. Significance isn't about being unique or central. It's about the quality of experience, the depth of awareness, the richness of connection. Even if there are infinite other conscious beings scattered across the multiverse, my consciousness remains precious to me, and the consciousness of those I love remains precious beyond measure. The multiverse might actually enhance rather than diminish our ethical responsibilities. If every choice I make creates or selects a branch in the quantum multiverse, then I'm not just affecting this universe, but participating in the creation of reality itself. Every kind action, every moment of courage, every expression of love brings into being a universe where those things happened. Conversely, Every cruelty, every cowardice, every failure of compassion creates a universe marred by those failures. This isn't just metaphor. If the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct, then choices genuinely create branches in reality. I find this both empowering and sobering. Empowering because it suggests that our actions have cosmic significance, that we're literally shaping reality through our choices. Sobering because it means there's no escape from responsibility. Every possibility is realized somewhere, including all the ways we might fail or harm others. The multiverse doesn't provide moral comfort. If anything, it heightens the stakes by multiplying the consequences of our actions across infinite branches of reality. But perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps reality should feel weighty, should demand our best efforts, should call us to live with integrity and compassion. These cosmological frameworks also change how I think about human potential and purpose. If consciousness is rare in the cosmos, if most universes in the multiverse are sterile and lifeless, then conscious beings have a special role to play. We are, in a very real sense, the universe waking up to itself, matter arranging itself in configurations capable of understanding and appreciation. This places on us a responsibility not just to survive, but to flourish, not just to exist, but to explore, create, understand, and experience as fully as possible. We owe it to the cosmos, or perhaps we owe it to the improbable miracle of our own existence, to make the most of this opportunity. I wonder what it would mean to truly embrace this cosmic perspective in daily life. How would I live differently if I fully internalize the knowledge that I'm made of atoms forged in stars, that my existence depends on quantum fluctuations in the early universe, that I'm part of an eternal cosmic dance of creation and destruction? Would I worry less about petty concerns? Would I love more deeply, knowing that love is one of the universe's most remarkable achievements? Would I treat others with greater compassion, recognizing that we're all improbable conscious beings struggling to make sense of existence? I think the answer is yes, though I admit I often fail to live up to this cosmic perspective. The daily concerns, deadlines, conflicts, anxieties can eclipse the broader vision. But when I do manage to step back and see things cosmically, I find it transformative. Arguments seem less important, status and achievement feel less pressing. The simple fact of existence, of consciousness, of being able to experience and wonder, that becomes enough. Not that I stop striving or caring, but the striving comes from a different place, motivated by gratitude and curiosity rather than fear and ego. The cyclical nature of some of these cosmological models also offers a kind of consolation, though perhaps not the traditional kind. If the universe bounces, if branes collide repeatedly, if reality cycles through endless iterations, then nothing is truly final. Death, dissolution, the end of civilizations, even the heat death of the universe, all of these might be temporary, just phases in an eternal cycle. This doesn't erase the reality of suffering or loss, but it does place them in a larger context, suggests that endings are also beginnings, that destruction contains the seeds of creation. Yet I'm careful not to use this as escapism, not to diminish present concerns by appealing to cosmic cycles. The suffering that happens now is real, regardless of what might come in future cycles. The love I feel now matters, regardless of whether similar love might arise again in another cycle. The key, I think, is to hold both perspectives simultaneously, to recognize the eternal patterns while honoring the immediate reality, to see the cosmic context while fully engaging with the present moment. This is difficult, perhaps impossible to maintain consistently, but I think it's a worthy aspiration. The possibility of multiple universes with different physics also makes me appreciate the particular rules of our universe more deeply. The speed of light, the strength of gravity, the properties of atoms. These aren't just arbitrary facts, but the specific conditions that make our kind of existence possible. In other bubbles of the multiverse, light might travel faster or slower, gravity might be stronger or weaker, atoms might not form at all. Each bubble explores a different region of possibility space, and we happen to exist in one that permits complex chemistry, stable stars, planetary systems, and ultimately life and consciousness. This makes me wonder about the nature of physical law itself. Are the laws of physics fundamental and unchanging, or are they more like local bylaws that vary from universe to universe? If the latter, then what determines which laws apply where? Is there some meta law that governs the distribution of physical laws across the multiverse? Or is it truly random with every possible combination realized somewhere? These questions push at the boundaries of what physics can address, blending into metaphysics and philosophy. But that's appropriate, I think. The deepest questions about existence naturally span multiple domains of inquiry. I've also come to appreciate the profound humility that cosmology demands. Every time we think we understand the universe, we discover new layers of complexity, new scales of structure, new possibilities we hadn't imagined. From geocentrism to heliocentrism, from the solar system to the galaxy to the observable universe, each expansion of our cosmic horizon has displaced us further from the center. The multiverse represents perhaps the ultimate displacement. Not only are we not at the center of the universe, but our entire universe might be just one among infinitely many. This could be depressing, but I find it liberating instead. It frees me from the burden of cosmic importance while allowing me to focus on the things that genuinely matter: connection, understanding, growth, compassion. The search for meaning in a possibly infinite multiverse brings me back to existentialist philosophy. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence, that we're not born with predetermined purposes but must create meaning through our choices and actions. The multiverse perspective reinforces this existentialist insight. There's no cosmic blueprint, no grand plan into which we fit. Instead, we're free, radically, terrifyingly free, to choose what matters, to create purpose through our lives. The physics provides no guidance here. It simply shows us the stage on which we act. The meaning of the play we must write ourselves. This existentialist freedom can feel overwhelming. With infinite possibilities, how do I choose? What makes one path better than another if all paths are realized somewhere in the multiverse? I think the answer lies in authenticity and engagement. I choose based on my values, my relationships, my understanding of what constitutes a good life. These choices are mine, particular to my situation and context, and they matter even if other versions of me make different choices in other branches of reality. The multiverse doesn't eliminate the need for choice. If anything, it emphasizes that choice is all we have, the only way we participate in shaping which branch of reality we experience. As I bring these reflections toward a close, I'm struck by how cosmology has become for me a kind of spiritual practice, though not in any traditional religious sense. Contemplating the cosmos, its origins, structure, evolution, possibilities, fills me with wonder and awe. It connects me to something larger than myself, while paradoxically helping me understand myself better. When I consider that I'm made of atoms forged in stellar furnaces, that my existence depends on precisely calibrated cosmic conditions that I carry within me, the memory of 13.8 billion years of cosmic history, I feel both humbled and elevated. I'm tiny and vast simultaneously, insignificant and precious, temporary and eternal. The quiet marvels of cosmic evolution that I set out to explore have turned out to be not so quiet after all, but rather a thunderous symphony of creativity and transformation playing out across scales that dwarf human comprehension. From quantum fluctuations to bouncing universes, from colliding branes to eternal inflation, from the vacuum's seething activity to the emergence of consciousness, each element contributes to a story far more extraordinary than any human mythology. The universe, or multiverse, doesn't need supernatural embellishment. The physics itself, even when highly speculative, reveals a reality more mind-blowing than fiction. What I've come to understand through this contemplation is that the search for cosmic origins and structure is inseparable from the search for meaning and purpose. We don't study cosmology merely to satisfy idle curiosity, though curiosity certainly drives us. We study it because we need to understand our place in existence, to know where we came from and where we might be going, to grasp the context that gives our lives meaning. The physics and philosophy interweave, each enriching the other together, painting a picture of reality that challenges and inspires. The anthropic principle, which initially seemed like a mere logical tautology, has revealed itself to be profound. Yes, we must observe a universe compatible with our existence. We couldn't observe anything else. But this fact connects our presence to cosmic structure in deep ways, suggests that consciousness and cosmos are not separate but intimately related. Perhaps necessarily so. We are not observers standing outside the universe looking in. We are the universe observing itself, the cosmos becoming conscious of its own existence. This perspective dissolves the boundary between subject and object, observer and observed, self and universe. I began these reflections thinking about beginnings, about where everything came from, about the first moment or the absence of such a moment. I end with a different understanding. Perhaps the question of origins is less important than the question of participation. Whether the universe bounced, whether branes collided, whether we're in one bubble of eternal inflation or a simulation or something else entirely, these questions fascinate but don't determine what matters most. What matters is that we're here now, conscious and capable of wonder. What matters is how we treat each other, how we engage with the mystery of existence, how we use our brief moment of awareness. The cosmos has given us this extraordinary gift, consciousness, awareness, the capacity to understand and appreciate our own existence. How we respond to this gift is up to us. We can squander it on trivialities, or we can embrace it fully, living with intention and wonder and compassion. We can see ourselves as cosmic accidents, meaningless fluctuations in a meaningless void, or we can recognize ourselves as the universe achieving self-awareness, as matter becoming mind, as creation contemplating itself. Both perspectives have truth in them, but I know which one I choose to embrace. So I sit here under the vast night sky, knowing that the light reaching my eyes left distant stars years or centuries or millennia ago, knowing that I'm seeing the past, knowing that the present extends in all directions beyond what I can ever observe, and I feel connected to every atom in my body. that was forged in stellar cores, connected to every quantum fluctuation that made my existence possible, connected to the eternal dance of expansion and contraction that might have no beginning or end. I am, briefly, the cosmos knowing itself, participating in the grand conversation between existence and consciousness that might be unfolding across infinite universes. And for this moment, this precious, improbable moment, that is enough. That is everything.